à-bas-le-ciel.
I got an interesting email from a Patreon supporter named Emil. Shout out to Emil. It may be interesting to me for different reasons than it's interesting for you in the audience, or maybe not for the same reasons she had for writing into me. So Emil writes, I was thinking about my personal struggles with veganism, dealing with my sister and her children who are still eating animals, and why it's so hard for her, and especially the kids and her husband, to go vegan. I've thought about this many times before and already came to the conclusion, as you've talked about in your other videos, I believe, that for some people who have hard lives, she has hard in quotation marks, hard lives like working mothers and fathers, it can be difficult to go vegan simply because they have very little time and energy to educate and teach themselves about how to live vegan, how to transition to a fully vegan lifestyle. Okay, so pause. Now maybe in this case she's correct. Maybe that really is the problem, is that it's hard. But really, to say that presumes that they already have the intention, that they truly have the intention, that they truly have the aspiration to become vegan, but can't do it because it's hard. And that's very, very rarely the case. It could be the case here. It could be someone who's in that predicament. But for me, it is much less often that I encounter someone who's really dealing with hardship that prevents them from becoming vegan. It's much more common that I meet someone who has a justification of their hardship that prevents them from going vegan. So in their own minds, they have a justification, and that justification has become part of their identity, part of how they perceive themselves, part of their own moral system, how they perceive the world. And it's often more difficult to let go of the justification than it is to let go of the thing being justified, right? Now, again, in this analysis, this reflects my own personality type. I'm the type of person who never misses the taste of bacon, right? To me, that's not compelling or meaningful. I never miss the taste of, ice cream made out of cow's milk. That's not me. But the kind of justification that made these foods, and for instance, made something like leather a meaningful part of your life, maybe a meaningful part of your family, your tradition, your culture, those justifications, I can see them being much, much more powerful because, again, reflecting my own personality than the actual, experience. And I'm going to use an example here that is much less sensual, has nothing to do with food or fancy leather shoes or what have you. But, I meet a lot of people who, one way or another, are attached to, let's say, a justification for why they never went to college, why they never went to university. Or in other cases, a justification for why they dropped out of university. Or a justification for why their whole life would have been better if only they could have gone to university. And then on the flip side, I met all kinds of people, maybe people who have PhDs, who absolutely have to insist on a justification of how wonderful their university experience was, and will attack and criticize anyone who doesn't see it that way. Someone who's a threat to their sense of the esteem the establishment should be held in, or what that educational process and the degree is supposed to mean to them. And of course, there are all kinds of other combinations. Meet people who did completely, who did graduate from university, but where they're attached to a justification that nobody learns anything in university. And they don't see it as just their own experience. They see it as a kind of universal explanation. Again, you may not have had those experiences or met those kinds of people, whoever you're watching this. To me, that's a real example of how that sense of clinging to a justification for something in your own life, not necessarily a matter of good and evil, not necessarily a matter of self-indulgence versus self-discipline, obviously not a matter of health versus unhealthy. I've seen so many cases where that's really part of the bedrock of someone's personality, and they can't part with it, Maybe it has to do with the jobs you got or the jobs you didn't get. There may be all sorts of experiences that have embittered you since you went to university or since you dropped out of university, as the case may be, where your evaluation of what it means, what's good and bad about university, just becomes this fetish within your life, and you may not realize how attached you are to it. So in that same way, I don't know, maybe, Emil, you're writing into me, and really the problem is hardship. but maybe instead it's the justification of hardship. Because, look, I remember what it was like to take a chicken and cut the meat off the chicken. You know what I mean? Just deal with the skeleton of the chicken. That's so much time. I remember what it was like to cook a turkey, before I was vegan. And you come up with justifications for these things, right? I never took the feathers off a chicken or turkey. I never did it at that level. I never gutted, a whole animal. But you put in so much work to make a turkey, even if it's just for yourself, let alone to make a turkey for your kids. And of course your kids don't appreciate it. Kids don't have a refined palate or anything. To them, it's just more food. Putting in 12 hours or something to prepare these different meat dishes. And yes, maybe there's the justification in terms of the violence, the animal being killed and the ecology and the other headings. But I've got to say, just the filth, just the labor, just the use of your time and money and dealing with the filthy, bloody bones that are left over. I mean, you forget that as a vegan. You forget what it's like where at the end of cooking a meal in your kitchen, you have a filthy, putrid mess that you have to worry about spreading contagious disease. Having to spray disinfectant and wipe that down. Just how awful it is to deal with that. And I mean, I knew First Nations people. So First Nations, American Indian, what do you want to say? Korean Ojibwe people, where they were taking that time to go out and hunt a beaver or hunt a moose and kill this wild animal and then take the fur off it and take the skin off it and chop up the skull. They would eat the meat out of the cheeks of the animal and all this, then the tongue, and all this labor. And again, they're partly doing it for themselves, but it's always this thing about passing the next generation, right? And then smoking it, what do you want to say, barbecuing it. I think they did smoke a lot of the meat. But anyway, smoking and barbecuing this meat and giving it to the children. And the children can't really appreciate it. I mean, children can appreciate a chocolate bar. But, people get into a really deep kind of justification. Honestly, I think, and again, I have observed this. I've observed this in many parents and in many people. Because if you were single, if you didn't have a husband or a wife or kids, you wouldn't put in 12 hours to preparing a turkey for Thanksgiving. If you were single, you wouldn't go out and hunt a moose and do all this crap just to eat a moose, go through the unbelievable, again, the filth, the blood, the bones, and at the end, you fill up a whole garbage bag with the bones. I remember, even with a turkey or a big chicken, it's just awful. So I think that people are more attached to the justifications than they are to the thing itself. That this is part of being a good parent. For First Nations, for American Indians, you can really imagine that for many of them, they think that's integral to passing on their identity. It's integral to proving that they're not assimilated, that they can still go out and kill and eat a moose, that they can still go in and trap beaver, and they know how to roast beaver over fire. I can sympathize. I understand the powerful symbolic value of that. And I don't know, I didn't grow up Christian, but doubtless for Christians, an American Christian, the Thanksgiving feast or the Christmas feast, these religious occasions, and all the hours put into the meat, there's a justification there, right? It has to mean something. It has to have some kind of meaning. Because if it's not, if we get detached, if we can just release our grip on that delusion, then so many things in our own life are revealed as meaningless and such a waste of our own time and energy and money and work. Trying to prove to ourselves in our own lives this is meaningful and trying to prove to the next generation, trying to pass it on. That all disappears in a vapor, right? So yeah, it's hard, but I don't know if it's hard for the reasons you're suggesting here. For Genevieve, shout out to Genevieve. Genevieve is a supporter on Patreon. Shout out to Genevieve. For Genevieve, I remember she talked about the fact that when she was younger, she put so much time into preparing gourmet food for her husband and for her kids. And again, of course, the kids don't appreciate it. They don't know the difference, especially when they're younger, right? And involve things like turkeys, forms of meat that have a lot of work put into them. And then in committing to veganism, she did relatively recently, I forget, a couple years ago, you're not just recognizing something about ecology or the suffering of the animals. You're recognizing something about the symbolic value of labor and culture within your own family and within your own life over so many years, right? So letting go of those justifications. And in her case, I don't think she's religious at all. It's nothing like Christianity or none of those other issues. But still, you can just be attached. You can have a justification just in terms of the cultural snobbery involved, which is very real. Which is, that sense of, a lot of us feel it. I don't know, some of you were born vegan. Most of us can remember. Like most of us, before we were vegan, I would never give my child this crappy hot dog out of a plastic packet. No. I'm going to take the time and give my child some high-quality meat or high-quality steaks. There are all these levels of snobbery and kind of false health information about trying to give your child the best or something good enough or something sophisticated enough. And taking the time, whether you're cooking that yourself or buying it at a boutique, whether that's for your child or your husband or your wife or whatever, And yeah, there's a kind of cracking realization that all of that was not just morally wrong, but profoundly pointless. So yeah. But anyway, I agree with you in principle. For many working mothers and fathers, it's hard. But that's what I think is hard. Is parting ways with those justifications, be they cultural, religious, matters of personal identity, tradition, or just sheer snobbery. That you feel you're the kind of parent who would never feed your child, bacon bits, but who would feed them, cordon bleu, would prepare, Yeah. It's a lot to let go of. Same thing with leather, obviously, the snobbery surrounding luxury goods and leather. Anyway, so I continue. This is not, again, I mentioned in the opening, what I find interesting about this is maybe not what she finds interesting about this. So Emile's message continues. That made me think about how it would be so helpful for these kind of people to have a community which they could reach out to in an organization which offers volunteers to maybe help around the house and make it easier for them to transition to the vegan lifestyle. Answering questions, helping to cook vegan food, etc. Okay? Now, what you're about to hear explains why Emile connects this way to the issue, and I assume why she connects to my own past video, my vegan manifesto, the video on community, right? So next paragraph, she says, quote, "My mother is Jehovah's Witness, and I have experienced myself how great the support is from those people to other people in the community." So that made me think of how great it would be for people struggling with going vegan if there were an organization that could help non-vegans to transition to the vegan lifestyle, period. My question to you is, how could such an organization be established? So I have actually seen that. And if possible, do you think such an organization for vegans could ever become a somewhat close community, like, for instance, the Jehovah's Witnesses? Right. So obviously, these are issues I care about. They're talked about On Community, a video I've now translated into 12 languages, I think. So that video's message still matters to me, and I'm passionate about it. But there are two problems here. One is love, and the other is money. I do know of an organization that allegedly did just that in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, the city I was living in Canada, and it fell apart because it's the usual thing. Small number of people organize it, and they started fighting with each other, and there was a split between this guy who was the leader and this other guy who wanted to be a leader, and they didn't like each other. And then one of the guys left. He moved to Vancouver, and then the whole thing fell apart. When I got there, their website was still up, but it was no longer responding to emails. And I asked people about it, and they said, oh, don't ask. These two different factions hated each other and tore it apart. But there was a vegan foundation allegedly doing exactly what you're describing. What you talking about? Look, I got experience in Buddhism. I got experience in ecology. I got experience in different kind of walks of life. To have the level of love to open your door and let a stranger come into your home and do a cooking demo for you. And on the other hand, for the person doing the cooking demo, someone come into your kitchen, go into another person's kitchen and show them how to cook some vegan dishes. It's so much easier to make that happen as a for-profit business than as a charity. That's a fascinating example of a function where everyone would be more comfortable if it's a service that's bought and paid for than if it's a relationship like church to flock, right? There are relationships of authority there. If it's a client paying someone to come and do a cooking demo, right? Then the person in the home, the person learning, they're in charge. They've paid their money. Maybe they just paid $50 to have this vegan cook come and do a demo. Fine. I think in Western culture, people can handle that. But if it's a charity the other way, if the person doing the teaching is in a position of authority, they're not being paid. It's not a clientelistic relationship. It's very, very different. Now, in a religious context, those are exactly the issues that are taken care of. In a religion like Jehovah's Witness, or in some forms of Buddhism, well-organized forms of Buddhism, the relationship of authority is overt. So it's already taken care of. So psychologically, people wouldn't be in the church if they didn't accept that relationship of authority. And the relationships of love, the commitment, whether it's a completely abstract religious sense of love or commitment to the community on the basis of some shared creed, shared identity, there are types of love there that bind people together also. And in veganism, we ain't got that. And it's quite likely we never will. We never will have that. Somebody wrote to me on Twitter recently asking about having a central organization for veganism instead of having fragments. And my reply, which was a spur-of-the-moment reply, I said, no, the future of veganism is not going to be centralization. What we need are more fragments of higher quality. We need 2, 3, 20 PCRMs with 2, 3, or 20 lawsuits. We can't just have one PCRM. We need others doing other things. It's just in the past we could have a PCRM, an organization like PCRM, just specialized in leather. We could have another one just specialized in dairy, whatever. We could have different issues being taken on by different organizations. But we're never going to have a Catholic church of veganism. And if we did have formal organizations like the Catholic Church, I think they would be even more fragmentary. They'd be even more narrow because they'd be trying to narrow it down to the point where you meet that threshold. It's a very good test where you meet that threshold where you would be loving and trusting and respectful enough and have enough of a relationship with authority to open the door to your home and have someone come in and do a cooking demo for you for free. So there are some aspects of the cause that are well addressed by nonprofits, by charities, by political organizations, or even by religious organizations. But there are other aspects of the cause that are handled much better by a for-profit company. And honestly, what you're talking about here, having someone come into your house and talk you through this, the same way you can pay someone to do you can pay someone to come and give you a consultation about redecorating your home. All right? If you pay someone to do that, if I'm the client, I'm going to pay you $100 to come in and do an evaluation and make a checklist, make suggestions for how to redecorate my apartment. Okay? I'm completely comfortable because I'm the paying customer. If I'm not, if you're doing it for free, if I'm beholden to you, if you're coming in because, you're coming in to tell me how to redecorate my house because we're members of the same Buddhist temple or something. See already how that's a little bit weird? What if it's somebody who's not invited at all? What if it's someone who invites themselves over to tell you how to redecorate your apartment, to tell you how to change your lifestyle, who tells you how you should eat, what's healthy and what's not? Interesting, huh? But yeah, sure. It would be wonderful if in future there were ever an organization or community within veganism remotely as tight-knit as what the Jehovah's Witnesses have. But if that happens, it's not going to be a broad church for all vegans. It'll be some group of vegans who have much more in common, much higher levels of mutual respect, mutual trust, and a sense of a common mission and objective. Otherwise, as I've been saying for years, veganism is fractious and fragmentary, and what we need are more high-quality fragments. And I hope we can have some level of mutual respect between those fragments, where people can look across the divide at one another and recognize, hey, maybe we don't have so much in common politically, maybe we don't have so much in common, morally, ethically, in other ways, but we're all vegan, and we all fundamentally share the vision of a world without industrialized animal agriculture. We all fundamentally share the motivation of doing our small part to try to abolish, factory farming and to cease to be a society where human beings feed on the corpses of millions of animals.
À-bas-le-ciel. À-bas-le-ciel.